Now, I don't know if it's true, but I read that dentists have the highest suicide rate in professions. So with that in mind, what do you hate about this business?
Yeah, really, it's kind of a couple things that are the worst. Part of it is just, employee headaches. I think most dentists would agree with that. One other thing I dislike about dentistry is that you have to do all the work in person. So I wish I could work remotely.
Have you ever wondered how private equity is able to pay so much more than you for a business? Do the laws of economics just not apply to them? Well, they do, but they're playing a totally different game. They're focused on something called multiple arbitrage. And on today's episode, I sit down with the owner of one of the hottest investment vehicles of the last 5 years called a dental services organization. And I want to understand how these roll-ups work. And most importantly, are there any of these roll-ups of the fruit variety? Welcome to another episode of Niconomics, the show for entrepreneurs and wantrepreneurs who are curious to learn how other businesses work. I am your host and Chief Curiosity Officer, Nicholas Haluski. I've owned and operated more than a dozen businesses, generating $30 million a year in revenue and employing over 300 people. And on today's episode, I'm obsessed with just one question. How the freak did David Ensley manage to beat private equity at their own game and build a $70 million, 21 location dental services organization? I hope you enjoy.
David, welcome to Niconomics. I'm pretty stoked. This is the first time I've ever used this space. This is the new ConvertKit space that they built in downtown Boise. And so I'm testing it out. I got my own podcast studio. I feel rad.
Wonderful. It's exciting. You look great.
Thank you so much. I needed to hear that today. All right. So in its simplest terms, what is your business and how do you make money?
Yeah, wonderful. So I'm an orthodontist. So we're in the dental industry. And then on top of that, I'm part of a DSO, a dental service organization, or sometimes dental support organization. So we actually have a group of practices beyond just a solo private practice. But yeah, in dental.
Awesome. And I want to talk more about the DSO. Tell me, how did you get into the space in the first place? What made you want to be an orthodontist?
Yeah, so I actually had braces when I was a kid, and I was in high school driving a lawnmower around. We actually had a family lawn business, and so I was driving around in the Georgia heat trying to figure out what to do with my life, and I decided I probably wanted to work in the air conditioning. And so I was thinking about different jobs, and I'd had braces, and this orthodontics thing seemed pretty cool. So I went and visited my orthodontist, shadowed, and realized that this could be a really great profession and career. And so went through college, went through dental school, and kind of stuck with it. Nothing really dissuaded me or took me off that path of becoming a dentist. And then when I got finished with dental school, I did an orthodontic residency, and I had actually done an Army scholarship through dental school. So they paid for my dental school, and you have a little living stipend, so it really helps out with the finances there. So yeah. I went on active duty after I got done with dental school. And so that's what I did my orthodontic residency. I was actually on active duty. I wore a uniform to work and stuff like that to do my orthodontic residency.
No way.
When I was done with that, I went ahead and did 4 years in El Paso, Texas at Fort Bliss, just doing my payback time. And then after that, that was when I got out of the Army and I moved to Austin, Texas and built a private practice.
Okay. So for those who don't know, orthodontist, first you go to dental school and then you do a specialty after dental school. Is that right?
Correct. Exactly. Yeah. So it's 4 years of college, 4 years of dental school, and then 2 to 3 years of residency.
My wife is a dental hygienist. She went to USC. So USC was one of the few schools that actually have a bachelor's degree in dental hygiene. Okay. And then after she graduated, she actually was adjunct faculty. She taught at the dental hygiene school. So
very cool. Yeah, that's awesome.
She loves the dental space. And I actually tried to convince her a few years ago to do a DSO. I love DSO. So tell me a little bit. You moved to El Paso, was that right?
We were in El Paso in the Army. I moved to Austin to start the private practice.
Okay. So you moved to Austin, you start your practice. At what point do you decide I'm going to start a DSO? And I guess maybe first describe what a DSO is.
Yeah. So your classical model was you'd have a dentist, they would have a solo private practice. So they would, have a space that they owned, they would own the practice, and they would usually work by themselves for their whole career. And that was the way that dentistry was done for years and years and years. And then eventually, as dentists, we realized that we could be a little bit more professional. We could build a real company that actually did dentistry. And so there's a few different models in the DSO space that we can get into later. There's a lot of roll-up action in the dental space with DSOs. So a lot of people buying up multiple practices and then trying to sell them for larger multiples. But there's also people that are just trying to actually build a group of practices. Basically, they want to have more than just one practice. And so they build and operate those practices as a group.
So the DSO model, as I understand it, is essentially a group of practices that have central tasks being taken care of, administrative tasks, billing, collections, HR, payroll, claims management, etc. And you kind of hit the nail on the head that there is a big push right now in the dental space, in particular with private equity companies who are coming in and buying up dental practices and rolling them up. Can you explain why, though, DSOs have become popular? Because if I'm a person on the outside, I would think, what's a DSO? Why don't you just own these dental practices and roll them up? Why do you have to have this thing called a DSO in order for the dental practices to get rolled up?
Yeah. Well, there's a few drivers. If you think about it, a lot of doctors, we spend a lot of time in school. So you spend 4 years in dental school learning how to fix teeth, but you don't learn anything about business. And a lot of dentists don't want to do the business, basically. So that's one driver. Is a lot of people, they're attracted to being part of a DSO because they want some help on the business side of things. And so there's a lot of doctors that's very attractive to. There's also definitely, it's profitable. So if you're running a good dental practice, there's a lot of profit there. And then when you help run the business side, all those things that you mentioned, the HR, the billing, and take those off the shoulders of the doctors, then everybody's happy a lot of the times. Now, once again, a lot of the momentum in the DSO industry was built around some of that roll-up arbitrage. So just over the last 20 years or so, there's been a lot of money to be made in buying and selling dental practices. And there's been more and more consolidation in the industry. So that's eventually going to taper off. But up until this point, that's actually been a big driver in DSOs, is trying to acquire practices, build them into something larger and more professional, and then sell them at a higher multiple.
So one thing you didn't mention, which kind of surprises me, is that in many states, like dentists have to own the practice, or physicians have to have ownership in the practice. I thought that was kind of one of the main drivers for DSOs. It was like, this was like a workaround. Hey, if I, Nick, a non-physician, wanted to buy a practice, I had to partner with a physician, and then we owned a DSO that owned a share of the practice. Is that less common now than it used to be?
Yeah, no, that's another major thing that actually determines how it's structured, basically. Because if you, Nick, just wanted to go build a dental office on your own, forget about DSOs. You're just like, I'm going to build a dental office. So you can't just go out and build your own dental office. Yeah, because of those state laws. So that, some of the structure, the way that they work, the agreements and everything is actually to comply with those laws about dental ownership in the industry.
So what does the structure usually look like? Like if I wanted to do that, I'd have to partner with a dentist and they'd own 50% of the company?
Yeah, there's different structures. One very common one that gets around that is you're selling support services, dental support organization, basically. So you're saying, hey, you keep on owning this practice, but you're going to pay me to do these different support functions. I'll do your HR, I'll do your billing, I'll do just these different things that the dentist wants to get off their shoulders. So that's one model that you can do. But then the other one is there are direct ownership ones where they'll kind of buy the whole practice and everything. Some of the big ones all do that. So yeah, there's different ways they go about doing it, but that's one of the drivers, is trying to avoid that direct ownership.
So how does your DSO function? Like, how does it look?
Our group is called Celebrate Dental and Braces. And so we have 21 locations nationwide. I'm a regional partner, so I own the practice in Austin. So we're a little over 10 years old. So we've been trying to grow slowly and steadily. And a few of our things that we really believe in is we have general dentistry and orthodontics in the same practices. And with orthodontics, we actually have an actual orthodontist at the practices doing full braces and Invisalign. And our goal is to make treatment, affordable, quality, and convenient for patients, basically. Ours is based off a management fee. So each of the practices pays a management fee to Celebrate Dental and Braces.
Is the management fee fixed, or is it variable?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Is it a percentage, or is it just a dollar amount?
It's a percentage of collections, exactly.
Percentage of collections. Oh, that's really interesting. Okay. Functionally, you still own the practice, but then have a share of the DSO. Is that correct?
Yeah. So functionally, most of the doctors will own their practice. So they bring in revenue, they pay out their expenses, they pay out this corporate royalty or management fee, however you want to phrase it, basically out of their revenue. And the rest of that's left over after that is theirs to keep, just like if they own a private practice. And our goal is to save them more money than we charge them, basically. If their overhead is better at the end of the day than if they were on their own, then everybody's happy. What
a lot of companies do that I've seen in the DSO space is, you mentioned it earlier, there's this thing called multiple arbitrage.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to try to briefly explain it, and then you can tell me how dumb I am. But essentially, like if I'm looking at a dental practice, and I'm just going to speak like broadly here, and the dental practice does, let's just say, $500,000 a year in EBITDA. Well, that dental practice could be sold to another dentist for $1.5 million, let's say, 3 times earnings. Again, it could be more, it could be less, depending on the specialty and the margin and all that stuff, but $1.5 million. And traditionally, that's the way that it's been done, is a dentist or a physician, because there are MSOs as well, they would just sell to another physician or another dentist, and it would change hands at that 3 times multiple. Well, what kind of private equity saw was, this is interesting. If the EBITDA of a business is actually not 500,000, but 5 million, it's not valued at 3 times EBITDA. It's actually now valued at 10 times EBITDA.
Exactly.
And there's public comps for this. There's companies that have gone public, and there's also companies that have sold to private equity, et cetera. So they look at it and they say, if I can buy 10 $500,000 practices for $15 million, then because of multiple arbitrage, I'm now doing $5 million in EBITDA. I'll get the 10x multiple valuation. And so my practices are now worth 50 million, but I only spent 15. So they've got $35 million in between there that allows them to either refinance or sell or go public or whatever, but they've built $35 million of equity value. So when you hear multiple arbitrage, that's what they're talking about, is the difference between these small standalone companies versus when they're rolled up. My question to you is, how did you get exposed to it? Is this a group of dentists who have kind of pooled together? Because you said regional partners, so I'm assuming there are other regions where there are partners. Or were you approached by, a private equity group or a business person? Like, how did you kind of get exposed to the DSO world?
Yeah, so our group is entirely doctor owned. We don't have any private equity involved.
Nice.
So that's our plan for the foreseeable future. You never know, but that's something we kind of believe in, is doctor ownership. And so I was first introduced to the group. I was getting out of the Army, looking for how I could actually own a practice. And in Austin, it's very competitive. There's a lot of saturated markets all over the country where it's kind of difficult to own a practice. Austin's a young enough city also. There just weren't any practices for sale. And I knew I wanted to own a practice as soon as possible. So in that case, if there's no practices for sale and I want to own a practice, it means I need to start from scratch. And so I was looking around and networking, and some of the supply reps actually introduced me to the founder of Celebrate Dental and Braces. His name is Dave Ferguson.
Cool.
And we just hit it off right away, basically. And what Dave did as he built the company is he was willing to give a lot of partnership and a lot of equity away to people he believed in that he thought were going to help grow the company. So some groups, they're really only wanting to bring on employee doctors. So if I had approached some other DSOs, they'd be like, yeah, sure, we'll hire you as an employee.
Right.
And the difference with Celebrate was like, no, come be a partner. And so that's what allowed me I knew that DSOs had competitive advantages. So if you think about it, they're getting supplies cheaper now.
Absolutely.
All these economies of scale, basically, that I knew that to be competitive in the future, I wanted to be involved with a DSO. But once again, most of the time you can't actually own in a DSO. All they're offering you is to be an employee. So that was a really cool thing. I found Celebrate right at the right time where they're actually willing to bring on partners and allow them equity, basically. And that's how we've continued to grow, is trying to attract more partners.
You said this was 10 years ago?
No, I joined 5 years ago.
5 years ago? Yeah. And I talked at high level about DSOs strictly from a financial perspective with the multiple arbitrage. But like you said, the ability to negotiate contracts, both from a payer level and at a vendor level. So, if you're working with Henry Schein and you're trying to get your supplies at a discounted rate because you're offering group purchasing power, that's a huge benefit to it. If you're going to these insurance companies and you're trying to negotiate rates, that's a huge benefit to it. You also get to specialize. So you'll have specialization in billing and collections and HR and AP and payroll and legal and your CFO. So yeah, there's a host of benefits to it that allow you to recognize some economies of scale. Like I totally get it. I was just saying that there's been a huge influx of private equity because they see, there's money here for us to make, which has been interesting. So you own your practice in Austin, but you also have ownership in the DSO, or how does that function?
Yeah. So like I said, the founder, when he structured things, whenever he opened a new region, he wanted a partner both on the ground, basically to run the practice and to help run the DSO portion. So I own 100% of the orthodontic practice in Austin, but then I'm a partner in the DSO, or sort of the corporate portion.
Interesting. How do you guys, if you're willing to share, how do you decide on what the management fee is going to be?
We've just kept it consistent over the years. So it's kind of been the same all along. Yeah.
Interesting. And do you guys get together once a year and because obviously you have your own practice to manage, but how does the management of the DSO differ from the management of your own individual practice?
Yeah. That's kind of honestly one of the most fun parts is being a dentist can be lonely sometimes if you're in private practice. You're all by yourself, you got this team and you enjoy working with them, but they're not really your peers, So lots of people have good friends that they talk with and everything, but I've just really enjoyed going down this dental journey with some other partners. So we get together once a year for a partner meeting and play pickleball and spike ball and hang out at the lake and stuff like that. So that's a lot of fun.
Rad, man.
And then just constant emails and phone calls and stuff like that with the other partners working on sort of corporate group level type of stuff. So it's been fun for me. So I, run the day-to-day in an orthodontic practice, putting braces on and doing Invisalign and stuff like that. But then also it's kind of fun because maybe I can step back and work on a company-wide type of thing. Just as an example, I sort of spearheaded all our aligner initiatives. So working on rolling out more Invisalign in the group. And so that's something I do for everybody. So just little things like that. Each person contributes in their own way like that.
So for you, if you guys got approached by somebody from the outside, private equity or a business person to invest in the company, are you guys open to that? Or are you kind of firmly dentist owned, this is all we're ever going to do? Or are you kind of agnostic at this point?
We really want to stay private for as long as possible, basically. So if somebody offered us $1 billion, of course we'd sell, but right now we're focused on growing it. Really, we kind of looked at the deals that private equity was giving. And we're like, okay, so they were going to buy us and do this and that and everything. Well, why don't we just do it ourselves? Why don't we build a professional organization and make it a great place to work and make it a place that we want to own forever? So we're focused firmly on staying private at this point and just making it a great place to work and grow.
It's smart too, because I've been seeing more physicians and dentists doing this where they're starting their own DSOs that are owned by the group, because you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get the economic upside, right? So whereas if your practice was there in Austin, $500,000 a year in EBITDA, it's worth $1.5 million. If you were alone, but with a DSO now, because you're lumped in with all these other dental practices, your practice is actually worth $5 million. So if you ever sold as a group, it increases the value of your individual practice because you're selling, together as a whole.
Exactly.
So that's like the amazing upside, but you get to keep the control as a physician of the quality of the care that you're providing. I looked at doing a DSO about 5 years ago, and my wife was like, if you do a DSO, I'll divorce you. because in her mind, she's like, oh, Gentle Dental, West Coast Dental, all they're worried about is volume. They just want to get as much billable as they can, and care suffers from it significantly. But in this model, being dentist owned, I think, I'm not saying that your incentives are misaligned with private equity, but a business person is going to come in, they're just going to think, how can we increase revenue? And there's potentially some incentives there that aren't necessarily aligned with the patient.
Yeah. It's an interesting conundrum that you mentioned there, because there's a lot of DSOs that run practices. If you look at their Google reviews, they're terrible, 3.5 stars, stuff like this. So it's not every single DSO, but there are some corporate places that give everybody else a bad reputation. Totally. And so we want to stay as far away from that as we can, basically. I think some of that may have actually been practices. All they cared about was rolling up. They knew they were making money because they were getting that multiple arbitrage. I'm just going to buy as many practices as I can. And they weren't running them well, but they continue to make money because they just lumped them together and were able to sell. So I think, especially with a more challenging economic environment right now, it's actually really pushing everybody to actually operate well, run good dental practices. And if you run good dental practices, now they'll actually grow, and now you can be growing organically versus just relying on this multiple arbitrage.
Talk about the economics of a practice. How do you acquire customers? So you talked about opening your own practice in Austin. You didn't go buy a practice. How are you going out and finding new dental patients?
Pretty dependent on the market, actually. So for example, think of a rural practice. A lot of times the problem is just having enough dentists. So you hang a shingle out in some rural areas and you'll be inundated with patients without doing anything. Just put a sign up, you'll have more patients than you need, basically. Versus in cities, a lot of times it's pretty competitive. There's a dentist around every corner. I mean, have you driven around lately and just looked at strip malls? There's a dentist in every single strip mall, So it's kind of crazy.
We just drove to Salt Lake last week, And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
how are there so many dental and orthodontic practices? It's
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyways, agreed.
Yeah. Yeah. So in big cities, it can be very competitive. So marketing is super important. That's something that we really focus on as a company. It's one of our core competencies. That's what we put some of our marketing and management fees towards, is doing marketing. And we really hit on all fronts. Yeah.
What is marketing? Is it paid ads? Is it SEO? Is it, in person, boots on the ground? What are your marketing funnels?
We try to do a little bit of everything. So 5-10 years ago, Google pay-per-click was really cheap. And we kind of hit it hard on pay-per-click before other people were. So at the beginning, we grew our business a lot with pay-per-click. You could buy clicks for so cheap, but we really had to expand into a lot of different areas, basically. So we're talking Google paid ads, Instagram, paid TikTok ads, actually, billboards, direct mail, in-person boots on the ground. With some of the orthodontists will get referrals from other dentists. So really, it's kind of like an all of the above strategy.
Do you track what your customer acquisition cost is? Like, do you know how much it costs for you to acquire a new patient?
We do. So different channels are easier to track than others. So for example, our TikTok paid ads, they all feed into the Go High Level CRM. And so we know exactly how many clicks we got, how much we spent, and then we track all those to conversion. TikTok has been actually one of our greatest channels lately for orthodontic patients.
Nice.
A little surprising there, but those are in the $50 to $100 per lead. Okay. Google pay-per-click, on the other hand, has historically been a little harder for us to track all the way to completion, basically, but those have gotten very expensive lately, 200 plus, basically. With billboards, we would do a custom number, so we'd know exactly how many people.
Are you saying per lead or per new client?
Per new client, yeah.
All right, so let's just say it's $150 per new patient that you spend, you get a new patient. What is your lifetime value, I guess, for that patient?
For an orthodontic patient, it's between $5,000 and $7,000 to do braces for them. Yeah. And then the cool thing for us is, we have general dentistry and orthodontics in the same place. So not only can we get $6,000 for braces from a patient that we bring in, but we might convert them to be a general dental patient and get cleanings for the next 5 years. Or we might get the kid in, and now all of a sudden the parents want to see the general dentist. So to us, it can be very high on the lifetime values.
So essentially you're getting a 50 times return on ad spend.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's wild. Do you know that that's good? Or are you like, well, yeah, that's normal because that's our practice?
Well, I mean, we definitely do some things very well, but if you've ever kind of been around orthodontists, you'll see that they spend a lot of money on advertising because they know that. They're like, I mean, even if you spent $500 bringing in a patient, that's actually going to be worth it, because most of the time your overhead is 50%. So you bring a patient in, they spend $6,000 for braces. Generally, your profit's going to be somewhere around $3,000. It varies, but somewhere around $3,000. Here's the other thing that makes it even better. Is it's kind of like a marginal profit margin, basically. So say you have 500 patients that you bring in every single year and your profit margin is 50%. Well, if you can bring in a 501st patient, you've already paid your rent.
Right.
You've already paid all these fixed costs, basically. So now your overhead's even less than 50%, basically. So that's why you see orthodontists working very hard on marketing, is because it almost always pays off to try to bring more patients into the practice.
You have 21 locations across the country. Can you talk high level, like what's the average revenue per location and what's the average net income per location?
Yeah. So nationwide, our practices are on track to do 65 to 70 million in revenue this year between all 21 of them.
So $3.5 million per location.
Exactly. Now there's general dental and orthodontics in each location. We build bigger clinics. So it's almost like there's 3 practices in each clinic in a sense. But once again, that drives our overhead down, keeps everybody more profitable. Yeah.
Holy crap. Okay. So on 3.5, what's the bottom line performance on just an average clinic?
Our overhead is generally around 50 to 55%. Overhead, when you think about it, you're making profit as a doctor. So if you actually break out doctor pay, say you're going to pay an associate, or you actually were like, well, I work in the practice, I need to pay myself type of thing. A lot of times that's maybe 30% of collections would be doctor revenue if you're going to hire somebody or you're keeping track of it. So often the actual true profit margin is maybe closer to 20% or 15% in a practice.
Okay, so let's just say it's 20% on $3.5 million, $700,000 a year.
Yep.
Is your net income. Is that before or after your fees to the DSO?
Right, that's after. So that's profit after you've paid all those fees. Yeah.
And then I'm assuming you also have some distributions from the DSO as well.
Correct, yeah. If you're a regional partner, yeah. Yep.
Sure. Dude, that's fascinating. All right, so I have some rapid fire questions for you to end this.
All right, let's do it.
What do you love about this business?
I love transforming people's smiles. It gives people so much confidence when you actually give them a smile they like. I'm still in the chair doing real orthodontics at this point. Who knows, 10 years from now, maybe I'm just running the business, but right now I'm still doing clinical orthodontics. Man, there's nothing better than taking somebody's braces off and just seeing them, sometimes they'll cry, or they'll just be so happy about their new smile. So that's the best
awesome.
part, is working with the people and making smiles.
Now, I don't know if it's true, but I read that dentists have the highest suicide rate in professions. So with that in mind, what do you hate about this business?
Yeah, really, it's kind of a couple things that are the worst. Part of it is just, employee headaches. I think most dentists would agree with that, basically. So, maybe trouble with your staff or your employees or things along those lines. So employee headaches. One other thing I dislike about dentistry is that you have to do all the work in person. So sometimes I wish I could work remotely. If they can make a hologram of myself so I could be at the practice while I'm at the beach, in San Diego or something like that, that'd be amazing. But sometimes dentists feel like a little bit trapped at their practice, like if you're gone, like the show doesn't go on. I joke I can't have sick days. Like if I'm not there, like the practice doesn't run. I'm not allowed to be sick,
Attorneys are that way, CFO or CPAs are that way, physicians are that way, because it's like your billable hours are your income.
Yep.
So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Totally
so it's that's one of the drivers for me of wanting to build a group so that, you can have, it's not just me in a single practice working all the time and it's not running if I'm not there.
All right. So that being said, leads into my next question. Everybody's jealous of everybody for some reason or another, right? We're all like, oh, grass is greener on the other side. Doesn't mean that we want to do that, but there are aspects to it that we're jealous of. What business are you jealous of right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of spins off of that. It really is people who can work remotely that I'm jealous of. This one time, this family was in the practice and they're like, yeah, we'll need to get started on braces a couple of months from now. We're spending the summer in Montana. And they were just working from home from a cabin in Montana. And I was like, man,
you can't work from Montana, my friend.
Yeah. So I think the tech industry, I have a little jealousy about the tech industry, because there's this neat mix of, there's some incredible W-2 jobs. Being an entrepreneur is not your cup of tea, basically, but also there's incredible businesses that can be built in tech. So yeah, I'm not sure if I would trade necessarily, but definitely some jealousy of tech bros working from home.
For sure. Okay. What are you obsessed with right now? And by that, I mean, if you have 2 hours in your day, family's not home, you don't need to worry about work. What are you doing? What are you spending your time and your energy on?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of the operations of the practice at this point, new patient flow, just kind of making sure that we nail that new patient funnel. Now, when you're kind of thinking, that's like in the moment. Yeah. So like if I had free time, I'm immediately going to go to operations in the practice. When I step back just a little bit, though, it's like opening new locations. Like that's what kind of makes me kind of passionate and everything is it's just really exciting opening new locations. So that's the long-term obsession, is getting that next location open.
Last question. What advice would you give yourself 10 years ago?
That's a great question. I think it would be trying to keep things in balance. And I actually got this advice from a mentor probably just at the right time. I was in the Army and doing some moonlighting. And he told me, he's like, which do you think you're going to want back 10 years from now? A few extra shifts, a little extra money in the bank account at that point, or, some time that you spent with your kids when they were little. And so I think fortunately I got that advice from somebody 10 years ahead of me, but I'd probably give that advice again to myself, basically, is keep it in balance. We're always wanting to be achievement oriented and successful. And sometimes it's not even about the money. You just want to build something, but just making sure that you don't sacrifice the things that are more important along the journey.
It's great advice, man. I love it. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. I definitely learned a ton. Where can people find you? Where's the best place to get connected with you?
Yeah, so they can visit our website, celebratedental.com, or I'm actually on Twitter as well, at the DSO guy.
Okay, awesome. Well, this was fantastic, David. Look forward to having you on again in a couple of years when you're exiting for $500 million.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, great talking with you, Nick. It was fun.
All right. Thanks, man.
All right. That's it. Another one for the books. I'm fired up. I don't know what else to say. I hope you found something valuable in that conversation. I hope you learned something. I hope there's something that you can apply to your business today, tomorrow, in the future that makes you money, makes you more successful, gives you more time with your kids. If there was something, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Give me some feedback. And if you like actionable advice and you want more of this, I write a weekly newsletter that gives insights, tips, and tricks into the world of entrepreneurship. Subscribe in my bio. And if I can help you in any way in your entrepreneurial journey, don't hesitate to reach out to me, Nick at cofounders.com. Sorry, Kelly, for more emails. And the last thing is, remember, curiosity is a superpower, and you can use it to your advantage. As my mom used to say, there's no such thing as a dumb question, only dumb people. We'll see you next time.